The Virtual Curbside is a production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Utah AAP, working together to improve children's lives through education, advocacy, and networking. Hi, this is Paul Workus from the Utah AAP. Welcome to this week's edition of the Virtual Curbside, where we bring pediatric providers together with subspecialists to get smarter about all things pediatric and better acquainted as a community of caregivers. Welcome back to the Virtual Curbside. This is our monthly episode 4, where we get to ask our speaker all the questions that we've gotten from our episodes for the month so far. And by the way, thanks for all your questions and feedback. The Virtual Curbside is brought to you in part by a generous grant from Primary Children's Hospital. Primary Children's Hospital, the child first and always. Welcome back to the Virtual Curbside. We're very fortunate this month that Mike Moss has been willing to join us for some questions. Welcome back, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Heard very nice things about your episodes. And this is, for one thing, I think very useful and fascinating stuff. So thanks for sharing expertise.
Yeah, always happy to help out.
Good. So before we start, anything to disclose?
No disclosures.
All right, let's dive right in. So first of all, shout out to Miguel Canocle, who sent a great question after week 2, but it turned out that you answered his question in week 3. Just to reiterate, you want to just mention again the utility of honey with battery button ingestion?
Yeah, the question was around, should we be doing anything to prevent injury before we're able to go in and remove that button battery? And then 2 things out there. One that someone could do at home before they come in is honey, right? If we say older than a year, of course. And then in the hospital might have access to Carafate, sucralfate to give instead, basically creating a little bit of a barrier there for that electrical discharge and caustic injury to stop and interrupt that before we're able to endoscopically remove the button battery. And at least in some in vitro and then in some little ex vivo or little pig models, it's been effective in reducing the depth of injury and things there. So we do recommend both of those things. Of course, ultimate management is removal of the button battery, but that always takes some time to get moving, so we can do a few things in the meantime.
And as you mentioned before, the really rough thing about button batteries is they're the perfect size for curious kids to swallow. They just seem to be almost designed for harm.
Yeah, and they're in these little toys, and the cover is going to pop right off, and the kid's going to fiddle with them, and they're in all these things that they're going to be handling, maybe unsupervised, and you may not even have known what kind of battery was in there because it came with it, and it can be even hard to recognize and figure out that something even happened in the first place, and you just have a kid who's in some sort of distress, and then it takes a high index of suspicion to end up, getting that X-ray and see that, yep, there's a foreign body in there.
Yeah, man, oh man. All right, next question. I saw a report recently about an adolescent who died while doing a diphenhydramine TikTok challenge. Would you mind commenting on the dangers of the various types of TikTok challenges? And are there any resources to help us educate adolescents and families about the dangers of these challenges? We've got this broken down then into a couple of categories. First of all, medication-related challenges. I know about diphenhydramine and NyQuil. Any others that...
Those are the big ones. Diphenhydramine has come up a few times. I think as things change from one social media platform to another, then it pops up again. So medication ones, it's been things like that over the counter that can be abused as well, or then a challenge to do it, whether it's Benadryl, diphenhydramine, and then cough syrup, usually containing dextromethorphan. Those would be the worrisome over-the-counter things for diphenhydramine, right, and anticholinergic. The major morbidity there is probably in very large amounts. We occasionally have patients who have a seizure, and then in extra big ingestions, we occasionally get some cardiotoxicity, QRS widening, dysrhythmias. And of course, if you just have severe agitation and psychosis and hallucinations, you can end up with just trauma and injury, hyperthermia, rhabdo, etc. So those can be bad. I would say we see plenty of diphenhydramine cases just as suicide attempts and overdoses, so we're quite used to taking care of those. But there does seem to be this other subsection of teens who weren't necessarily trying to get high and weren't trying to harm themselves, but were doing this just as the modern version of a dare from your friends.
And the dare is just simply, can you do this and survive? Or is the dare, I mean, as many adolescent dares are, right? Driving too fast, doing things that are risky. Is there some sort of perceived thing that's going to happen?
I don't know. Kind of the same thing. And I guess it's the same. All of us can look back now at our teenage years. And why would I have ever done anything that someone dared me to do? What was the goal here? To win and to have a cool reaction on a video and then post it to your followers of, look how crazy that was when I did all this. I'm not entirely sure what the goal is, but I think most people experiment with diphenhydramine once and then realize it's a really bad experience and don't want to do it again.
Okay. Seasonings. So nutmeg. Tell me about nutmeg.
Yeah, nutmeg is very tasty. I love it. We got a
It is.
fresh
It's
whole
delicious.
nutmeg in our cabinets and like grate it fresh into whatever we're
Right.
cooking. But we've known for a long time that nutmeg contains myristicin, so it can be a bit of like a psychedelic LSD sort of compound. And people seem to have picked up on this and think, hey, this is a natural way to get high that you can buy this and do it. And been some severe cases where someone took like you're talking like tablespoons of nutmeg, like
Oh,
not going to
wow.
be tasty to do
Right.
this. So not just a little teaspoon, not just sprinkle some on your food, but you know, eating entire whole nutmegs or multiple tablespoons of it. It takes a large dose to get enough of that compound that's there to have any psychotropic effects, whether they're anticholinergic or classic psychedelic serotonin, LSD sort of things. And I believe there's, like I said, the case report out there of someone who had some pretty severe outcomes. I can't remember if that one was a death. There's too many of these that have happened over the years of which
Yeah.
one went poorly, but that's the idea. And I think that one at least has a little bit more of, hey, nutmeg has like some LSD that you can get and you'll be able to get high. But I think people find that consuming the nutmeg is difficult and that the high is not that great. And also it comes with some other properties that are pretty unpleasant.
And is there risk for toxicity?
Yeah, yeah. So certainly from this similar there of, the anticholinergic and psychedelic kind of
Gotcha.
things. Most of these are not generally that life-threatening. There's always the trauma angle. And of course, we can do so well with some basic supportive care in a hospital that if someone is at home and isn't found or is then found unresponsive on the ground for a long period of time and has some rhabdo or manages to aspirate, right? Things that in the hospital we would take care of and prevent. But I think these are when some of the bad things happens is when it goes unrecognized and someone is found after being down for a prolonged period of time.
Well, it seems like with the challenges there's a dual challenge. One is that if you're seriously injured and by yourself, but the other thing is that people may be embarrassed to say something and so
Yeah.
not look for help.
Yeah, no, it's true. They want to admit what they've done and realize this was not a good idea. I do think it's rare to have bad outcomes because most people are not going to get too far into eating nutmeg until they realize this is gross and I don't want to do it anymore. And so at least there's some self-limiting pieces in there for all of these that it does take a fairly substantial quantity of all of this to cause problems.
Related to that, as I was preparing for this, I was looking some stuff up. There's a cinnamon challenge that people are challenged to try to eat a teaspoon of cinnamon. And apparently, it's a very unpleasant experience.
Yeah, I think that one's goes back a little bit further, and that one has more of a, like a joke prank thing where someone will record you because that cinnamon powder hits your mouth and it's so dry, and you end up, just kind of aspirating just a tiny bit of it, and then you cough and sputter, and you're spraying cinnamon all over the
Gotcha.
room wherever you're eating it. I think there have been some reports of some significant lung irritation, maybe in a patient with asthma and things. So I think most people there, it's a little bit more around the prank idea, and then maybe some things have gone sideways for a few unlucky patients who aspirated a large quantity or had some underlying medical issues, but not trying to get high with that, mostly trying to make your friend cough and sputter cinnamon all over.
It seems like there are a whole cluster of things around salt. For one thing, putting it on your skin with ice. And as anyone who's ever made homemade ice cream knows, if you put salt on the ice, that it goes to a lower temperature, you can cause some thermal injuries there. But it seems that partly from a prank point of view, that people get to give someone else something really salty and film them. But some intentional salt ingestion, is that a thing?
I haven't heard of too many, so that one was actually kind of a new one for me
Okay.
on salt ingestion. It's certainly something we hear about. Of someone decides that salt water is going to help them and they drink too much, or a kid gets into some salt or baking soda sometimes, then we're talking sodium bicarbonate, and then we still have that sodium component in there. I hear more about the sodium bicarbonate. I'm going to treat something. I'm going to cheat a drug test. I'm going to detoxify myself somehow
Oh, oh, I
with these, at
see.
least on the baking soda angle to do it. And you do have to consume a fair amount. And again, unpleasant. It's really salty and you don't want to drink it. And so most people don't get into much of a problem. I'd have to double check and see what I can find out there with a salt challenge of how much you can take. And certainly the risk of getting hypernatremia could be pretty bad. That's one I haven't noticed, but maybe I should learn some more about it. I would definitely advise against eating lots of salt.
I,
It's
I
amazing to have to say some of these things out loud.
I would have to say, though, if there's a potential for doing something that's unwise, adolescents will find a way to do it.
Yes, yes, agreed.
All right. The last category we had were the household products. I'm hoping the Tide Pods thing, was that all just about eating something that was gross, or is there some presumed effect? I'm guessing you guys got called about it.
Yeah, there was a few. I think this one was at least one for us that was more worry about it. And we probably got more inquiries from like media than we had actual calls about it. And like, what? No one's, is someone going to actually try to do this? See, like, this is gross. And can you manage to swallow this thing? Because I think at least they know what they're trying to do and they're probably going to be likely to spit it out and not cause themselves problems. Our Tide Pods caused trouble with our toddlers who were eating it thinking it looks like candy and food
Oh,
and ends
sure.
up biting into it. And then they spray all this detergent into their mouth and inhale it and get some aspiration injury and things like that. So I think it was probably less likely to occur with those who were doing it intentionally, fortunately. And I ended up not hearing about too many of these cases, kind of got more interest in that this was even a thing rather than having a whole, cluster of cases, fortunately. But wouldn't recommend anyone do it, even if you know what you're doing, because you might get that surprise of now you've just managed to burst this little packet and then spray detergent into your throat and down into your lungs and could definitely cause yourself some
Yeah.
issues. Even in the toddlers who do it, right? Most Tide Pods, there are some notable cases out there in the literature. The vast majority of Tide Pod exposures do just fine and they have a little bit of mild irritation and they're all right.
Yeah. And then, of course, going well beyond the realm of challenges, the whole issue of solvents. So solvents are a very long-term concern. You want to touch on those?
Yeah, when I think of solvents, especially around kids and adolescents, I would think of kind of a few different categories, and that's pretty broad of what the solvent, right? Are you trying to huff something to get high, whether that's like a spray paint or glues and adhesives or something like that. So any number of things. Keyboard dust off, which is not exactly a solvent, but still a hydrocarbon of some form. So lots and lots of these have been used. Usually the issue there is the long-term use, but we occasionally do get a death from like the huffing, sniffing death, where you just get hypoxic, or there's potential for some cardiac troubles where you may cause yourself to have an arrhythmia and be particularly susceptible to some surge of adrenaline, and then you end up with VTAC, VFib, and have a cardiac arrest. Or is it just the simple asphyxia? You're inhaling something that's not oxygen, and then you lose consciousness and die that way. So when I hear solvents, that's what I'm thinking. There's also the other side of solvents. I just am translating that to hydrocarbons in my mind, and then I think about things around the house like furniture polish and tiki torch fluid and lamp oils, where we have toddlers drinking those on accident and then accidentally aspirating that and then causing a whole lot of pulmonary injury from disrupting your surfactants. So much more on the accidental side there.
Because they look a lot like things that people drink.
Yeah. And they're colorful. They may look like some apple juice or something like that of what the kid thinks it is. And yeah.
Any resources available to parents or to people who are like me, who are far past adolescence and not looking for challenges, but trying to keep my patients safe?
Yeah, we're always responding to these and we're doing news interviews. So you'll often be able to search and find someone saying something about this. We'll get called by our local news and put something out. As I was reviewing things for the Q&A today, I found, all sorts of publications from toxicologists, from poison centers, things that were published in pediatrics. Otherwise, we're like, hey, well, here's the next challenge. And we would recommend not doing that. Fortunately, we're used to all of these substances and there's not too much new on that end. And even though these have come up again in our age of Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc., they're still old substances that we know plenty about. And so your local poison center will always have some information. But if you're hearing about something new, give us a call, because then, we'll want to be on the lookout for it. And then we'll create some materials and put it out on our blogs, on our website, and push it out to local media as well. So that's always the trouble with these, is staying abreast of what's going on and what is the current thing. So come to our website, sign up for the Utah Poison Control Center Poison Place newsletter, and you'll get in our news. What are we seeing currently?
Which is a very great idea. We can maybe post that in our show notes, because that is an extremely useful idea. And the various platforms have had, at least I think, some commitment to trying to take things down if they're dangerous. But I think things happen at a rate that is pretty much both impractical and probably impossible.
Yeah, always the game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah. Yep. And by the time a guy as old as me knows about it, it's probably years old.
Oh, I feel that way too now. Like, what? How? Why is this happening? And
Yeah.
it's always going to be something like that. And now the troubles are just being amplified so much that it can
Right,
kind of spread
right.
like wildfire like that one.
It used to just get to spread, person to person, and now it goes all around the world in an instant. Well, Mike, thank you so much both for these fascinating episodes this month, as well as for all you do. Poison control is such a valuable resource. And, as we talked about over the last couple of weeks, such a beautiful, seamless resource. I mean, it just seems like something that works the way things ought to work. And so thank you so much for being part of that.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to help. We're always happy to talk. And like I said, we're always happy to answer questions. So everyone should feel free to give us a call anytime, 24/7.
Excellent. And we shouldn't feel too dopey if we don't know about something.
No, because you're like, wait, how am I supposed to? I didn't learn about TikTok challenges in school or residency or anything else. And what is this? And I haven't heard of this. And this isn't a medication, right? What in the world are these kids up to? And good chance that we'll know and we will have heard about what's going on.
Yeah, well, thanks for all you do for kids and families, and thanks for all you do for us, because it's such a vital service. I hope to talk to you again sometime. To our listeners, thanks for listening, and come back next week for another topic. All right. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to getting together again next time. The virtual curbside is available on iTunes or wherever you find your other favorite podcasts. Be sure to like us and subscribe. We want you to like us both because we're needy that way and because that will help other listeners like you find us. Check out our website, vcurb.com, for supporting materials, schedules, and other great stuff. The Virtual Curbside is an educational production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The opinions expressed in this podcast, while carefully considered, are ultimately the opinions of the presenters and not necessarily of the American Academy of Pediatrics or our employers. And remember, the content of this podcast shouldn't be seen as a substitute for seeking actual personal medical care. If this is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. Otherwise, schedule a visit with a caring healthcare provider to try to get to the bottom of your concerns. None of this could happen without Elisa Stoddard, our extraordinary executive director of the Utah AAP. Many thanks to Tim Cosgrove for his help on the website and logo design. Thanks to Phil Workus, who composed the theme music. See you next time.